Thank you, Swati. Good afternoon, everybody. October 14th. How does it get to be so late so quickly? I'm here tracking my children who just got out of school a few minutes ago, and we use our iPhones to kind of track them to make sure they got on the right bus and the right metro and that they're making their way home. Looks like folks are on their way, so that's all good news. I hope everything is good with you where you are. Today, as I'm sure you well know, we are going to be walking you through the new SPP APR package. This is the first year that the newly approved package will be used. Most of the information is content that you've previously heard, so it shouldn't come as any big surprise to you, but we know that you all, like us, have a lot going on, so it's nice to have a reminder. We also know that there are a number of newer staff out there who may be seeing this information for the first time, so we'll try to walk you through all of this, whether you're a return visitor or a new staff person, so that it's beneficial to you. I have the pleasure of introducing Christine Pilgrim, who is our Associate Division Director, who is in charge of the State Performance Plan Annual Performance Review process. Following her will be Jennifer Wolfsheimer, who is our Implementation Team Facilitator for the Data Implementation Team, which is in charge of all things SPP APR. We'll start in just a moment here, but as Swati said, if you do have questions, please enter those into the Q&A, and we'll try to take questions at the end of the presentation. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Christine.
Thanks, Greg. Good afternoon, everyone. As Greg mentioned, hope everyone is doing well. It's been a pretty hectic day for all of us. We were chatting right before this call about, back-to-back meetings, et cetera. And now here we are on with you. We'll try to be efficient as we move through the content. As Greg said, for a number of you, you've heard it in different national TA calls, et cetera. We'll be reviewing the FFY20 SPP APR package. We will go through some cross-cutting changes and reminders, as well as highlighting some changes for Part C and Part B specifically. Swati, you can go to the next slide. Just an announcement before we get started. The final FFY19 SPP APR documents are posted on the IDEA website. It's linked in the PowerPoint, and Swati just put it in the chat, so you can access those there. And stay tuned for the FFY19 indicator analysis reports. We are going through the final sort of reviews of those. The TA centers put in incredible work to sort of aggregate that data and draw some conclusions, and we're working on finalizing those to have them posted shortly. So moving into the FFY20 SPP APR, one quick reminder. Swati, if you can go to like the next 2 slides for me. Just a quick reminder for everyone that the OSEP, so your indicators C11 and B17 are due on February 1 of 2022. So with every other indicator, remember, this is going to be the first year that you're submitting those indicators on February 1 with the rest of your SPP APR, and you will be doing that in the reporting tool. So just want to flag for you, just a reminder, it's February 1 of next year that will be due. The link on this slide is to the final FFY20 SPP APR package document. So that includes the Part B and Part C SPP APR instructions, the SPP APR memo, as well as the measurement table for both Part B and Part C. So you can find them there. Please refer to those. Those are the most up-to-date documents. We made a few technical edits coming down the line, so what's posted now reflects those. Swati, you can go to the next slide. A few items about the platform. So we're working towards the December 20th open date, which is around the time that we've opened it in the past. So similar to previous years, for those of you that have been around. Just so you're aware, I wanted to highlight some of the things that affect our open date. The contractor has to engage in rollover activities from one year to the next to get the platform ready for opening. Obviously, this year we had to make a number of changes to be consistent with the new measurement table. The 618 data reporting timelines also affect when the system can open. For instance, for Part B, your statewide assessment data is usually due to the department the third week in December. And there's quite a turnaround time to sort of work through that metadata, pre-fill the data in the tool, and work back and forth to make sure everything is fine before we open. So that also impacts the timing. One thing I want to flag for you is we've said this in other national TA calls and in other forums, but just want to say it here once again, worth reiterating. For OSEP to be in compliance with the Evidence Act, all of the data submitted to the department has to come through the reporting platform. As a result, we are moving away from attachments. I know in past years, states would typically upload a number of attachments for us to review. Certainly that was how you had to submit the OSEP previously when it was on a different due date, but now it's going to be due with the other indicators you're able to do so within the tool. So moving away from any attachments. I know there's always concern about how much space there is to provide information. Just flagging for you, as has been the case before, you can always give us supplemental information in the additional information section that's under each indicator as appropriate. I know that the lack of rich text causes angst. Certainly for things to be visually appealing, we tend to rely on those rich text features, and the current reporting platform does not allow for that. And that is tied to the security issues. To have rich text invites a number of security risks. And so we are not able to do that, but we're continuing to investigate things that we might be able to do simply within the system that could help make things more visually appealing, but stay tuned, it's still something we're working on. The last thing I want to flag for you about open dates, et cetera, is around indicator 3. So this is for my Part B folks. When the system opens on the 20th, the indicator 3 data are not going to be pre-filled yet. That's because, once again, I mentioned it comes in around the third week of December. And because of the flexibilities that states were able to avail themselves of in terms of the administration of statewide assessments, which is tied to that February 2021 letter that came out from OESC, we have to work through metadata and try to figure out like exactly what states have been giving us and what is going to be pre-filled so that we can flag it for the contractor. So it's going to take us a little longer to complete that. So we're hoping for a January 3rd date that you will be able to see the pre-filled data for indicator 3 specifically in the system. So on the 20th, the system is going to open. You're going to be able to do all the wonderful things that you like to do. The only thing that will be missing is that pre-filled data for indicator 3. But you could talk in narrative. You can enter your targets. You can talk in narrative about any flexibilities you did have to avail yourself of. And on January 3rd, hopefully, that's the date we're shooting for, that data will be pre-filled in the system and you would be able to see it there and continue to work through indicator 3. PSC will be communicating about those dates as we progress through that. On that slide is also information for Partner Support Center in case you need to contact them for any reason. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the stakeholder input pieces in the new package. So as we talked about last year when the package was finalized, we've also talked about it. We had a special TA call, I believe it was April, to talk about stakeholder input, et cetera. We know that there are enhanced requirements for this part of your submission. They're noted in the general instructions. So if you pull up the documents, if you look at your SPP APR general instructions, that's where it's noted. So the next 4 slides are slides that we've used before to share this information with you, but just going to go through it very briefly here again. The current language that is there now indicates that in your introduction, you must include a description of the mechanisms for soliciting broad stakeholder input, as noted here. As was previously the case, there is a place obviously in the reporting tool where you can check that you want this description to be applied across all indicators. If you look, the templates were just released, yay, so I'm sure all of you are looking through those right now. There's a place for this sort of description of broad stakeholder input that could kind of serve like your executive summary, but then there's spaces further down that break out these specific sub-bullets that are noted in the instructions that lay out what this description must include. So Swati, you can go to the next slide for me. And these are these 4 sub-bullets here. So you will see in the tool, there are spaces for you to address each of these items within the system. I'm not going to read all the bullets to you. Obviously, what's here is a Part C example because it references the ICC and infants and toddlers with disabilities and their family. Part B instructions obviously mention the State Advisory Panel and children with disabilities, but please refer to the general instructions to be clear that you're hitting all of the things you need to hit in your descriptions. Next slide, please, Swati. So OSEP's expectation is that states are engaging very intentionally throughout the process with their stakeholders rather than just like sort of these discrete conversations about setting targets and that's it. Like we're looking for active engagement with stakeholders over the life of your SPP APR. Our expectation is also that you're reporting on the extent to which diverse stakeholder groups are supporting the lead agency and the SEA in the development and implementation of activities. We want you to consider various methods within each stakeholder engagement opportunity to allow for different learning styles, data style input, et cetera. And certainly what's flagged here on this slide in terms of networking, collaborating and transforming, really being able to attend to those, even if you sort of view them on a continuum. Next slide, Swati. So I think the most common question, Jennifer, and I've gotten, I think in the last few months is like, yeah, but what is it that OSEP really wants, right? Like you have all these words on the page, but what do you guys want? And ultimately, what it boils down to is minimally, you have to address the words on the page in the instructions. So every component that's outlined in the instructions, we expect that you address. But certainly we're also looking for you to show us and demonstrate meaningful engagement and inclusion with a diverse group of stakeholders with descriptions on how information was both shared out and gathered in terms of feedback, and keeping in mind that families are the most important stakeholders who drive our work. So many of you have engaged in incredible work in this space, especially as it relates to your OSEP. And I know for some, it might be a matter of like, sort of how do you convey that within a report? Like, how are you gathering that data in a way that allows you to convey it in a report? But we all believe, not just myself, that this focus on stakeholder input specifically tied to these requirements that we put into place for the new package are really driving this conversation in the direction that we want to see it go. And our TA centers and our parent centers have been doing an incredible amount of work in this space and have been for years and are well poised to support states in this work. So we're all looking forward to seeing the submissions next year to get a taste of some of the incredible work that you're doing. So Swati, you can go to the next slide. So as was the case for, I said last year's submission, but I guess it was February of this year, time is running together. But for your FFY19 submission, if you were around then, hope you were, you would recall that we asked states to provide us with very specific information about the impact of COVID on their ability to collect and report valid and reliable data. With the submission that came in February 1 of this year, your FFY19 data only sort of captured 3 years of COVID. And we recognize going into your FFY20 submission, which comes in next February, it's an entire year's worth of data that has been impacted by COVID. States were extremely transparent with the challenges they experienced and what they did to mitigate those challenges. And we're looking forward to that same level of transparency and richness with next year's submission. So we are expecting that states are going to report any issues related to data collection and reporting, anything that affected completeness, validity, and reliability for the data, an explanation of of exactly what the impact was and any steps you took to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on your data. We will consider any information you provide to us in our analysis of the SPP APR data and any decisions we make regarding how the data will be used for the purposes of determinations, as was the case this year. OSEP is able to consider publicly available information in making annual determinations. And as we did this year, we considered the impact of the pandemic when making determinations, and we'll do the same in 2022. Next slide. Just a few cross-cutting reminders for everyone. The states have to report on the FFY19 performance of each LEA or early intervention service program on the targets in the SPP APR. So it's a link you provide. Please don't forget that, because we do look at public reporting and respond to it. And for states that have been needs assistance for 2 or more consecutive years, please remember to report on the technical assistance sources that you use to receive technical assistance and the actions you took as a result. That's underlined on this slide because quite often states will give us the first item, but not the second. And then we have to ask for it during clarification. So just make sure if you're NA for 2 or more consecutive years that you are responding to both of those pieces in your submission. Next slide, please, Swati. So setting targets, your final target, which is your FFY 2025 target, must demonstrate improvement over baseline. It's not new. There are a few exceptions to that, which we've highlighted in our universal TA document, which is posted on the IDEA website, and the rationale behind those minor exceptions. But just in general, end target must demonstrate improvement over baseline. And obviously, as has been the case, for quite some time in setting your targets, you must describe your stakeholder input process, which is tied to some of the enhanced requirements that we talked about a little while ago. Also remember to address any required actions that were in OSEP response in your FFY19 SPP APR. So going back to that final document to see what OSEP had to say in each, under each indicator, under required actions, to see what you need to speak to for next year. So just double check that as you're preparing your submission. Next slide, Swati. For compliance indicators, this requirement has been in place for the last several years, but sometimes states do forget this explanation. So if you reported less than 100% last year in a particular indicator, and you did not identify any findings of non-compliance, you have to provide an explanation of why you did not identify any findings of non-compliance. So if you go back through your compliance indicators from your FFY19 data, any that were less than 100%, you're either telling us about how you verified correction of the non-compliance identified in FFY19, or if you did not identify findings, an explanation of why that did not occur. Next slide, Swati. So slide 16 is around how you are talking about verifying correction of non-compliance. So just want to talk briefly about sort of how we approach our analysis of this, because I think I hear sometimes states say, oh, but we explained it this way sort of 3 years ago. Why are you saying something now or not accepting it now, et cetera? I'm going to give you like the real deal nitty gritty, how Jennifer and I look at this when we go back through and do our quality assurance checks on all of the SPP APRs that have been submitted. So we're looking to ensure that the state has made clear to us that they have looked at updated data or subsequent data, and that in that review of the updated or subsequent data, that the program or district is at 100% compliance. So we're looking for you to give us your actual method you used to verify correction at that time. So sometimes states will describe a process that they use all the time and include words like, oh, we engage in activities such as, or could be, or could do, but that isn't telling us exactly what you did in that given year to verify correction of those findings that you're reporting on, those findings that you identified in the previous year. If you're cutting and pasting boilerplate language, wouldn't meet our bar. Looking for a description of the exact process you use. And then we're also looking to see that you demonstrated, that you've indicated that the individual correction was taken care of, so that the kiddo got what they were supposed to get, although late, that is definitively stated. So I think it's like 3 or 4 things, Jennifer, and I look for, right? Do you say you look at updated data? Did you tell us that based on looking at this updated data that the district or programs at 100%? Did you actually say what you did, not just describe a general process or cut and paste boilerplate, what you did in that year for those however many findings to verify that they were corrected and that the kid got whatever they were supposed to get? 4 quick and easy things. So now you know all the ins and outs, how we do this. You're like well poised to be able to get credit for your description of correction. Next slide, Swati. Another reminder and tied to the compliance indicators. So when you're reporting your FFY20 data, so in the February 1 submission in the APR, you need to make sure that the data only reflect the actual level of compliance prior to any opportunity to correct. So we want to make sure that there's no like sort of double dipping going on. So you give a program an opportunity to correct data, and then that corrected data is what you report as your FFY20 data. That should not be the case. So just want to give folks a reminder about that. So when you report this data, it should be the actual level of compliance, not the level of compliance after folks have had a chance to correct, and then you're sort of including those numbers. Next slide, Swati. General reminder about representativeness, because you have a few more requirements you have to attend to with the February 1 submission, and then in years to come, you have even more requirements, but we'll stick to what's going to be in play for February 1. So for your C4, B8, and B14, you have to include the state's analysis of the extent to which the response data are representative. Really make sure that you are speaking to the extent to which the response data are representative of what we're asking for it to be representative of. I say that because sometimes states say, oh yes, the data were representative of all children in the state, which may not be, and in many cases is not, what is required in the indicator. So just make sure that your comparison group, that you're speaking about what we're asking you to speak to when you do that analysis. And if your analysis shows that your data are not representative, you just have to make sure you describe the strategies you're going to use to ensure that they're representative in the future. Next slide, Swati. Still talking about C4, B8, and B14, so indicators where you have to speak to representativeness. This year, you're also going to have to compare the response rate for the FFY20 data, compare it to the FFY19 response data, and there will be a place in the tool where you'll be able to type in those values. Moving forward, the tool will automatically pull it from the previous year and calculate, so you won't have to do all that, but this year you'll have to enter it. So you're comparing the response rate to the previous year and describing strategies that are going to be implemented. You expect to increase the response rate, particularly for groups that are underrepresented. You're analyzing the response rate to identify potential non-response bias and taking steps to reduce that identified bias. And you also need to describe the metric used to describe representativeness. So the example on the slide is plus or minus 3% discrepancy. And there are places within the tool for you to do each of these things. So as you know, the changes regarding required demographic categories will not start until the 2023 submission for Part B and the 2024 submission for Part C, so that states will have time to make necessary adjustments. So I know that many of you are already embarking on that work and trying to make sure that you develop your system to be able to capture that data when it's time to report it to us. So we're looking ahead towards that as well. And my last slide before I turn it over to Jennifer, OSEP, so C11 and B17. As I mentioned before, it needs to be completed in the reporting platform. There is specific OSEP specific stakeholder engagement language that goes in that indicator as well, and there's spaces for you to include that. We would like for you to provide the links to the current theory of action and the evaluation plan within the tool. I know many of you have very visually appealing theories of action, as well as nice, pretty tables and charts for your evaluation plan. And while we can't have that embedded in the tool, providing a link then still allows us to sort of have that information in the tool, because as I mentioned, we need to come into compliance with the Evidence Act and have all data submitted to the department within the system. Jennifer will get to that in a minute, so I can pause on that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, and I will start responding to any questions that have come in on the Q&A as well. So Jennifer, it's all yours.
Thank you. So we're going to get into the specific changes in the FFY 2020 package. Next slide, please. So I know there was a question in the chat related to the ICC form being an attachment, and yes, it is a required attachment, so therefore that is the attachment that we are accepting and taking into consideration the challenges that programs have experienced in trying to make the ICC forms accessible post-signature. We are going to continue with what we did last year and have language in the OSEP response under the introduction accepting those ICC forms and or your SICC report that's attached, and acknowledging that in the introduction, and therefore the attachment will not be attached to the final docx that we make available in the end of determinations in July. Next slide, please. So just a reminder that our OSEP acknowledges that each state has its own eligibility criteria for determining if an infant or toddler with a disability is eligible to receive early intervention services in the natural environment. So comparing a state's data to the national average is not really meaningful comparison. So we have removed that, and that will no longer be a question in this year's SPP APR. Next slide. We're going to move on to part B. Next slide, please. So this is noted in the 2020 SPP APR instruction and is applicable to all. Sorry, just a second. I think we missed it. Yeah, thank you. Is applicable to all sub-indicators in 3 and indicator 17 for states that use statewide assessments for data to measure the similar. And again, this is in the introduction, the instructions for Part B's SPP APR. Next slide, please. So for indicator B1 for graduation rate, the data source for this indicator has officially changed to using 618 exiting data. States are to report the same data as used for reporting to the department under 618 of the IDEA, and which the department uses as part of our annual determinations under the 616 of the IDEA. Using the section 618 exiting data as the data source for this indicator allows direct focus on the outcomes of students with disabilities who receive special education related services at the time that they exited high school on the same standard and criteria for graduation that students without disabilities are required to meet. Further, this data will be pre-populated into the SPP APR reporting tool to reduce burden for the states. And if graduation is the focus of your summer, please have additional conversations with your state leads about the data source changes. Lastly, we would expect that all states who previously reported using ACGR for this indicator would have a new baseline for this upcoming submission. Next slide. Okay. So for indicator B2, with the FFY 2020 submission, states can report data under this indicator using 618 or the same data source that they used in the FFY 2010 APR. However, the FFY 2020 submission is the final year that states can use these two options. Beginning next year's submission, the data source for this indicator will be the 618 exiting data. We also made a revision for clarity and consistency in the instructions for describing what counts as dropout for all youth and youth with IEPs. So these data, again, just like indicator 1, are pre-populated into the SPP APR and will reduce burden for the states. And if you are moving currently from this year, if you're moving from option 2 to option 1, like indicator 1, we would assume that you would, we would expect that you would change your baseline due to the change in data source. Next slide. So previously, states were required to report inclusive of all ESEA grades assessed from 3 through 8 in high school for children with IEPs. With the upcoming submission, states are required to report on participation rates for children with IEPs in grades 4, 8 in high school. This indicator will also be pre-populated into the tool. Next slide, please. So for proficiency rates for indicators 3B and 3C. So indicator 3B will require states to report proficiency rates of children with IEPs against general academic achievement standards. And 3C will require states to report on proficiency rates of children with IEPs against alternative academic achievement standards. And these data will be pre-populated as well. Next slide. So the new indicator 3D, that measures the gap in proficiency rates. It requires states to calculate a proficiency rate gap for children with IEPs in grades 4, 8 in high school, and all students in grades 4, 8 in high school who are assessed against grade level academic achievement standards. The data will be pre-populated for you for 3D. One significant thing to note is this is the only indicator where the data represents a percentage point and not a percentage. Next slide, please. Okay. As a reminder, OSEP made 4 revisions for clarity and consistency to indicators 4A and 4B. We replaced district with local educational agency, added as defined by the state after each reference to significant discrepancy to clarify that the term significant, to clarify the term significant discrepancy. We defined long-term suspensions and expulsions as more than 10 days during the school year and included cell size in addition to in size. Next slide, please. So for indicator B5, states are required to report five-year-old children with disabilities enrolled in kindergarten under this indicator. Other than the 22 states who already transitioned in the FFY 2019 SPP APR, states will need to revise their baseline for this indicator to reflect this reporting change. Next slide, please. So indicator B6. States are required to report 5-year-old children with disabilities enrolled in preschool for this indicator. And like indicator 5, other than the states that already transitioned to include that group, we would expect baseline changes to report to reflect the reporting change. So in the upcoming submission, states will be reporting on 5-year-olds receiving special education and related services in the home. Adding the category home aligns the SPP APR with the EdFacts data collection tool and provides for more transparency. This indicator was revised to disaggregate reporting by discrete ages. States are allowed to either set one target inclusive of ages 3, 4, and 5, or set individual targets for each age. States currently report these data by discrete ages in the EdFacts collection. Reporting by and setting targets for discrete ages provides data transparency and makes the data more accessible to the public. For each sub-indicator, the state must use the same method for setting its targets. For example, if the state chooses to set targets inclusive of ages 3, 4, and 5, it must do so for all sub-indicators 6A, 6B, and 6C. As noted in the measurement table, states are not required to establish a baseline for targets for 6C if the number of children receiving special education and related services in the home is less than 10, regardless of whether the state chooses to set one target that is inclusive of ages 3, 4, and 5, or set individual targets for each age. In a reporting period during which the number of children receiving special education and related services related services in the home reaches 10 or greater, then the state would be responsible to develop targets and report those targets in the coming SPP APRs. The target for indicator 6C may be expressed in ranges. So this is similar to the dispute resolution indicators that we have related to the 10 or greater, and they expressed as ranges. The final target for indicator B6C should decrease from the established baseline in FFY 2020. OSEP expects that most children would attend a regular early childhood program and receive the majority of special education and related services in the regular early childhood program. Therefore, the targets established for home should decrease over time. Next slide, please. So this is just a reminder about the clarification to indicator 13 to include pre-employment transition services if appropriate in reference to the evidence that must be presented. Next slide, please. So for indicator B14, with the upcoming submission, states may continue to use one of the two options for defining competitive employment. States must provide the total number of targeted children in the sample or census. States must also address any problems with response rates that could lead to non-response bias, thus impacting the validity of the data. Next slide, please. So that is the end of our presentation. We can take questions now with the last 15 minutes.
Jennifer, I've been trying to respond to a number of them. So Swati, if you can do me a favor and drop the link. I posted it a little earlier, but lots of people are still asking the link for the template. Let's see, what time did I post it? 4:39 to everyone else, but if you can drop it for everyone to see, that would be great. I think I think this is worth explaining for everyone. There's a question for part folks around the distinction between the percentage and the percentage point for 3D. And then there's also a question around explaining the reason or the rationale for the target ranges. And I'm assuming that referring to allowing those for 6C. So Jennifer, I don't know if you want to take one and I take one, or you want me to.
Yeah, you want to take the percentage point now.
I will try.
I also have children transitioning to Taekwondo, so
no worries. All right, I'll do this easy one first that I just saw come up in the Q&A, and I'm going to answer it live. Still don't find information on text boxes having a limit of 8,000 characters. Yes, each text box has a limit of 8,000 characters. That is still the case. So each box, 8,000 character limit. Okay, this percentage versus percentage point piece. Swati, could you go to slide 30, I think? Well, it might not be 30. Could be 30-ish. It says 3D up at the top. Right. So this sub-indicator is asking for the gap in proficiency rates. So you guys don't have to do any of the math on your own. It'll be done in the system. But to get a gap rate, you're not just working out a percentage. You have to calculate the percentage of kids with IEPs in those grades who are proficient. Then you have to calculate the percentage of all children in those grades that are proficient, and then subtract one from the other. That's not a percentage, that's a percentage point, because it's looking at the difference between two percentages. It might be easier, and I flag that because it's not, so like when you're setting targets and working with your stakeholder groups, it's not a percentage, it's a percentage point. Your targets then, because it's a gap, should be decreasing, not increasing. So it was just worth mentioning. It became a big issue when we were ensuring that the reporting tool had all of the required changes from the OMB table, because every other indicator is a percentage. It's not calculated as a percentage point. And that's something that from the development phase in the tool had to be handled completely different and became a big conversation. So I just thought it was important we both did, Jennifer and I, to make sure that folks realized there's a difference between a percentage and a percentage point. I might not have described it super well, but percentage point, you're looking at the numerical difference between two percentages. A percentage is like a ratio. So there's that. What else was there? Oh wait, two people, I said patients, participants is what I meant, raise their hands. Jennifer, do you wanna, because now I have 5 questions in the Q&A. You guys bring them fast and furious. Do you?
The reasoning for the B6 ranges?
Yes, and I'll answer what's.
So the reasoning to allow ranges, and again, this is an option, it's not a requirement. And I'm sorry if that was not clear. So states may choose to utilize a range for a target or to just set a target. So similar to the dispute resolution indicators, we felt that giving this option to programs for indicator B6C would allow you to set a range target that would not necessarily drive a state to push to a certain target, but rather give more flexibility. And this was to be responsive to the feedback that we heard from the field regarding the inclusion of this sub-indicator. Christine?
Thanks, Jennifer.
And people, do you want to let people who are raising their hands ask questions?
Sure, I can answer. Okay, I did that one. Yeah, sure. I'll keep going in the Q&A.
Yeah, we have one person with their hand raised. So
Okay.
do you want me to?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, it's Annie Kalama. I'm going to allow you to talk. So you should be able to unmute. Let's see.
So my apologies, that was a mistake.
Oh,
Okay. Okay, cool. Thanks,
that was an
Annie.
easy question. Was there?
I'll there's one in the chat that I'll answer live. And it was around, since we need to move away from attachments to come into compliance with the Evidence Act, if OSEP could provide good examples of states that have described their data without using graphs, charts, tables, etc., especially for Part C indicators 3, 4, 5, and 6. I think, Jennifer, from our conversations with Daisy, so for Part C folks, with IDC for Part B folks, I think these are exactly the issues that our centers are wrangling with and trying to ensure that they're coming up with mechanisms to support states in how to engage in some data visualization in a way that is not as appealing as we would hope, but we are trying to ensure that we don't introduce security risks into the department system. So I would suggest reaching out to Daisy and IDC to support in this space, because I have been doing a lot of thinking around that. I'll answer that one. There's a question about where the presentations, okay, I just got a never mind, so don't worry about that. Let's see. There's a question about if they're going to be, and this is specific to indicator 14, but could affect 8 and B8 and C4 as well, looking at those response rates. It's around if there's any consideration for fluctuations in response rates, if the state is still achieving a high level of response. And ultimately, as noted in the instructions, we're asking you to report on that comparison and for you to do an analysis to see if you can identify any non-response bias and develop strategies to address that. So it's not like if you're sort of a penalty from OSEP if your responses fluctuate. It is, we're looking for that analysis of where you're seeing non-response bias and what you're going to do to address that. That's really the focus. I think, hold on, let me, questions around, will the links entered in the platform be active hyperlinks, or should the state provide the full web address for the link in the text box? Provide the full web address.
At this time, the hyperlinks go into the category of rich text. So we
need the full address.
Yeah.
What else we've tended to touch? Questions around attaching an introduction. Is that still an option? Once again, we need all pieces of the required reporting for the SPP to be done in the tool. I had a question earlier come through the Q&A around, well, why is the ICC form different then? Like, we're still accepting that as an attachment and opting not to post it. And as I referenced there, you know, we had lots of conversations with our contractor to see if the ICC form was something we can embed in the platform. However, there are issues because the individuals who review those and then sign those aren't necessarily people working in the lead agency all the time, and we can't give just sort of everybody access to the system. There are requirements around that. And we had conversations with our OGC attorneys about what was required. And since the ICC form is providing one method of certification, we're able to accept that as an attachment and just not post it because it's not considered data to the department in the system. There is, okay, we answered that live. Question about when setting targets, can we set new baselines or must we keep baselines from 2005? There are times when, and this is noted on our universal TA document, right, Jennifer? I'm pretty sure we talk about it.
Yes.
There are times when OSEP expects that states would have revised baselines, and that is when there's a change to the data source, some change in methodology, et cetera. We expect that your baseline would then be revised. So for Part B, we would expect indicator 1 that everyone is revising baseline, except for the handful of entities that never reported ACGR because they weren't required to, because that was a change in the data source. However, states are always able to revise their baselines for reasons that they choose. They just have to provide that justification to OSEP for us to accept it. So there are times we expect you to change it, and if you don't revise it, we'll ask you about it, but then you're also, based on your analysis of the data and working with your stakeholders, of course, able to come up with other times you do. You just have to give us the reason why. There are questions around possible to get a template for the OSEP in Word. It is the link that we dropped in the chat for the Part B and Part C templates. The OSEP is included.
Yeah, the OSEP is no longer a separate template. It's within the APR.
Yeah, so you can use that Word document to plan what you're writing, but then when the system opens, you'll be putting that information straight in the reporting platform. There's a question around states that are reporting might have changed their SIMR, what they're expected to submit. That's actually noted on the Universal TA document. I can drop that link in the chat, but I can't talk and do that at the same time. It's on page 5. It notes for states that are changing their OSEP what OSEP would expect. But I can do that. Here it is. Drop it in the chat. What is this? Hold on. Maybe not yet. You give me a second.
I think you got it wrong.
There you go. I just put it in the chat. What else is there anything else that, oh, 3D is 3B, can we use hyperlinks for graphs, charts, et cetera? We are only expecting hyperlinks for your theory of action and for your evaluation, not for anything else. Not really. How come y'all don't see it in the chat and I just put it there? Swati, can you troubleshoot that for me? It says.
Yeah, you just sent it to hosts and panelists. That's why you have to.
Oh, so every time I drop
I
something.
saw it.
Sorry, guys, didn't notice. Ooh.
Yeah, and in the last message before that too.
Yeah, can you fix that for me, please?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. For indicator 6C, does the state have to decrease targets when they're already at 0 or 1%? So, you would have to, right. Jennifer, you can go ahead because you started to give that one.
No, so you would have to decrease beyond 0, but if it was at 1%, the final target would need to just decrease over time.
So there's a question about 3D is 3B proficiency rate for children. So it's not just And you'll see when the data are pre-filled. Actually, if you look at the templates now, it'll say exactly where we're pulling the data from to calculate that. So it's not necessarily, oh, what your percentage was in 3B is just what we subtract to calculate 3D. That's not necessarily the case. You look in the template and you'll see for each of those sub indicators exactly where the data are coming from. There were lots of discussions about that and which files that taxed my brain as well as Jennifer's, because that was not our gift and talent at birth or through our profession. but you can look there and see. And if you still have follow-up questions, just shoot Jennifer or myself an email and we can follow up. You're always saying we're saying should decrease. We have not said must decrease. You said should for 6C. If for some reason there's a reason why yours would not decrease, then you would need to be describing that to us and providing that explanation, and then we can review it and provide the results of our analysis based on what you said. But if you go back to the response to 30-day comments, the language there, OSEP's response was that we would expect that it would generally decrease. It doesn't say must. If for some reason it's not decreasing for you, then you just need to be talking to us about why that is. Is indicator.
And when we say talking, put it explicitly in the narrative.
Yes, sorry. I don't mean just like tell us by email. I do mean put it in the system. Oh, Meredith, who said that we're, oh, bless you. Thank you. Jennifer and I have had a challenging day, so thank you. I think we've answered, oh wait, nope. Natural environments. Can the target stay the same for all the years in the period? We think of this target like a floor that we don't want to drop below. And if you, Jennifer, we talk about this in the Universal TA document.
Where are you?
Sorry, this is around C2. We mentioned this in the Universal TA document about targets.
Oh, yes.
The requirement is that the target has to at least be 95% for natural.
C2. So there are a few exceptions to the improvement over baseline, and those are outlined in the Universal TA guide. Which
Swati thankfully put for everybody to see, because I was only sharing it with people who already know, apparently, the panelists. So Barbara, you can check there, but it has to be at least 95%. Alan, hyperlinks haven't worked in the past. Like Jennifer mentioned, the system doesn't allow for rich text, but if we have the full web address, we can copy and paste and do what we need to do to look at it there, but then at least it's documented. We're trying to do our best within the confines of what we have to adhere to because of security risks, et cetera. Is the evaluation plan that's required via a link the actual plan that was developed in phase 2 or the results data from the last year's implementation of evaluation activities? So the link is to the current evaluation plan that you have. I suspect that many of you will be revising your evaluation plans, especially if you're changing your simmer or making some modifications to it with the new package. So for many people, there will probably be revisions, but a link to the current evaluation plan. There are places within the tool that you will talk through about sort of what happened with some of your activities, but the actual plan, the link is just for the actual plan. Question about
time check. It's 5:01.
Oh my gosh, it's 5:01. Okay, this is the last one. Is the vendor working on a solution to the security issues? Yes, we've been having constant conversations about it. And anytime you guys have given us ideas about ways to work around it, we send it straight to them to try to figure out. Like I said, this is a department-wide system. We are bound by certain security things. I think they're now trying to figure out if there's some, like a step below rich text things that we might be able to do, but
exactly.
we have not forgotten. We know how important it is to all of you.
We hear you.
Yeah, we do hear you. So it's 5:02. I feel awful that we've kept you for 2 minutes. So Sawati, I can turn it back over to you. If anything else comes up that I haven't addressed, Jennifer and I can always follow up with participants or something. So, but thank you so much for hanging in there with us for 2 minutes past. Always a pleasure. And we look forward to hearing all of your feedback on templates and the tool and the changes, and because we want to do better each year. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you.